Hello and welcome to Round the Table Live with Christian Concern. And today we're talking about Pride and Prejudice. Not the Jane Austen novel, but the month of Pride and all the prejudice that goes along with it. And today I'm delighted to welcome Keith Waters, Pastor Keith Waters, who has been one of the Christian Legal Centre's clients in the recent past and a victorious one, actually. We won a discrimination case with you, didn't we, Keith? Which we'll talk about in a minute. And we've also got Michael Phillips, one of our top lawyers from the Christian Legal Centre, who's run a number of our cases, legal cases, and he's joining us as well today. Welcome to you, Michael. And you're muted, actually, Michael, funny enough. And Keith, can you just remind us what happened to you? You a few years ago, you sort of moved jobs to work for a school as a caretaker, was it not?
It was.
In order to, as a kind of tent making job to support pastoring a church, and you put out a tweet. Just remind us about what happened to you with that.
Well, I think you've got a copy of the tweet, but just the gist of the tweet was
there it is.
So I won't read it out to everybody, but as a result of that tweet, well, a number of things happened. But first, it's probably worth saying why I put the tweet out, and that's because I've been doing that kind of thing for a long time. I've been using Twitter to just encourage people to be salt and light, but also for my own church. We'd had discussions about Pride. How could we reach out to Christians, as Christians into that community? How could we get people to understand, hear the gospel? And, some of those conversations had led to people saying, well, perhaps we should go down there and give them leaflets, get in there amongst them and tell them about Jesus. And my response was, well, there are two things with that. Some of these people had children, thinking this would be a good idea to take their children along. No, it's not a good time, a good place for children. It's a sexualized environment. Don't do it. And the other is we want to be people who take the gospel out boldly, definitely, but we need to have a real sense of compassion and a sense of Jesus' love. So stay away from pride. So that's what the tweet was for. As a result, unbeknown to me, the local newspaper editor was a great fan of Pride. He and his friends, a couple of ladies who were married to each other and happened to be Liberal Democrat councillors, managed to cause quite a storm in the local area. Now, that's something.
Over your tweet, a storm over your tweet.
Storm over my tweet. Yeah, that's something which I wasn't expecting. I'm not somebody who runs away from controversy, but I wasn't looking to be controversial. I was just saying what the Christian position is. As a result, though, I won't go into huge amounts of depth. We haven't got lots of time for that. But as a result, my employer decided that I was bringing them into disrepute and set on with a disciplinary process, which started to get more and more kind of interesting and difficult as we went along, because they were clearly joining the mob. It wasn't the case of let's investigate this. It was let's see what people are saying and throw it all at him. So and as a result, I had in fact early on in that point, I had a telephone call from a young man called Michael Phillips, and he said, "You might need some help." And I said, "Don't be ridiculous," or words to that kind of effect. No, it'll be fine. He said, "It might not be." A couple of weeks later, I said, "Well, okay, let's see how we can use this," because there are two things with this. One is clearly, having the income was very useful. It's always good to be able to pay the bills. But it seemed to me that I wasn't going to be able to stay in the school anyway. That was the way it was heading. But rather than kind of go quietly and just say, chalk it up to experience, it seemed that the right thing to do was to really make as much of this as possible, not in a negative way, but in a way which would give us the opportunity to share the gospel, give us an opportunity to share the truth about why we have certain views on certain things. And also, if I'm a pastor, I'm an ordained minister working in a school, I can't be there and live out my life and speak out the truth in my private life, in my other job. what can the teacher, what can any other Christian do? It gets very difficult. So that's the background.
You ended up losing your job, and then we had to take that to an employment tribunal, and we won a discrimination case. So they found that you had been unfairly discriminated against for your beliefs, which is very encouraging, and hopefully will put off any other employers from being prejudiced, shall we say. This is Pride and Prejudice we're talking about. Michael, do you see the link there between pride and prejudice?
Absolutely, Tim. It's the thing is that in some of our court cases, we quote the well-known legal scholar Humpty Dumpty, who was reputed to have said that words mean what I say that they mean. Yes. And the thing is that that is the real issue with this whole topic of pride and prejudice. On the face of it, it's a campaign that lots of people can join in with. It's about the whole family, etc. And it's obviously broadened out since its roots from the 1970s in New York City. But really underlying it all is a lot of stuff that a lot of people around the world, not just necessarily Christians, are going to have difficulties with. And the problem is that it's sugarcoating something which is unpalatable for many Christians. And I think the thing is that people who see past the sugarcoating and say, well, hang on a second, I don't think that I'm not going to stop anybody from doing anything. That's not my business. However, on this occasion, I can't join in, and maybe I might want to say something which is critical. Then they get stopped and they lose their job, and sometimes they get arrested. And it's just, the thing is that unfortunately, year on year, pride grows and grows and grows, which is obviously, people's rights. But at the same time, the scent against people who say, well, actually, I'm not entirely comfortable with what's going on, is also growing and growing and growing. And that's what in our cases.
Yeah. Well, and you say it's growing, but I wonder if this year it's actually a little bit more muted than it has been, or than it was last year. Because, for example, we work very near Oxford Circus, and the coronation flags are still up around there, the Union Jacks and all that, rather than as it was last year, all the pride trans flags, which is very, very oppressive. And I think there has been a bit of an encouraging kind of backlash against pride, including even from LGBT identifying people. There's an article on Spiked Online, the fall of pride can't come soon enough, from a former gay activist, or still gay activist in some ways, Malcolm Clark. Keith, what's your perspective on this?
Well, I agree that there seem to be some kind of chinks in the armor, as it were, but I do feel that momentum is still going. That it may be slowing, and I'm hoping, because real heart for this, that we do wake up, as a society, not just as Christians, but wake up to all of this kind of stuff. Because from my biggest concern really is the impact it has on children, on youth, and across the board. From schools through to social media, through to advertising on TV, subliminal stuff. All the stuff that the BBC, Channel 4 are putting out. Stuff on Netflix and all over the place that is actually saying this is all normal, and if you don't feel this way, there's something wrong with you. The whole thing is kind of tipped on its head. So I think you're right. I think there is some encouragement for us that those who are within that movement have seen that it's been hijacked by a number who are a lot more into certain fetishes and the trans movement and all of that. But still, there is that real difficulty, I think, there for us.
Yeah, because we moved a long way away from what it was originally about in the 1970s, the right to be left alone. And people understood that. And many, maybe even some Christians would say, well, okay, well, that's fair enough. But we are now moving from a position of punish the dissenters. So even sometimes the most mild criticism, and some of the cases that we've seen recently, some of which haven't been publicized, whereby people are being asked questions about what they think, and they respond in very reasonable and measured terms, and then they get into trouble. And the common thread, probably amongst most Christian Concern cases at the moment, is schools. Either a teacher at school or a pupil at a school, or parents at a school, it's nearly always schools. Schools are now the front line of the culture wars which are happening in just, the whole of Western civilization. And, it may have slowed down a little bit in the UK, but next year there won't be any coronation. Don't imagine. And what we're seeing across the pond in America is that we're seeing violence now happening every year at these in Pride Month. And unfortunately, it's not necessarily Christians who are involved in the violence, but we're seeing parents who just do not want their children to be exposed to certain ideas, and they don't know what to do because their rights are being infringed as parents. Because they're being told, no, you are a bigot. You are somebody who needs to be re-educated. And if we can't re-educate you, we will re-educate your children. And that's a phenomena that we've seen in our own cases and seeing across the pond as well.
And how does this work, Michael? Because people might say, aren't teachers prohibited from expressing political opinions and stuff? And the kind of the whole LGBT movement has a political agenda, but it is a political movement. It's achieved, for example, same-sex so-called marriage, and now it's pushing very much for trans self-ID and things like that. These are political initiatives. How do schools get away with this?
Well, at face value, the law says you're not allowed to indoctrinate children. And so, you would think that was the end of it. But the thing is that it's never that straightforward. And so at the same time, you have these other requirements when it comes to schools about sex education. And you think, well, hang on a second, sex education is really for secondary schools. It's not really going to be about primary schools. But we're beginning to see it even in primary schools under the guise of British values. And you think, well, okay, the rule of law, democracy, and so on. But how can we shoehorn in this particular ideology and way of thinking? But people will do. And people will say, the thing is this, that people who are introducing these things actually believe that they're doing something absolutely 100% right and moral. Mm-hmm. And therefore, maybe there's a little bit of subterfuge as far as they're concerned. But as far as that, they think that they're doing the right thing. And so therefore, they will continue to push it. And they will say, this is all about British values. This is all about social, moral teaching that we need to be telling the kids. And when you actually look at some of the stuff which is being put out, you think, hang on a second, this is not something, certainly not in primary schools, even some of it in secondary schools, that people should be exposed to, because, it is presenting an argument for not just teaching about something, but presenting positive arguments. And if you think about that, if, for example, even in a Christian school, you were told that, you must believe this, not just this is what Christians believe, but you must believe this, even if you're not a Christian, people would complain, and rightly so. However, when it comes to this particular ideology, then that isn't the case.
I think you actually hit the nail on the head, because it isn't just an ideology. It isn't just a political movement. It has become the national religion. And now, that sounds slightly provocative, but if you think about it, government departments, our health service, our education service, just look across Twitter or any other kind of social media, I guess, and look at the amount of rainbows that there are in people's profiles, and look at the way that this is being pushed. And yes, if you dissent, you're blaspheming against the national religion. And obviously that does sound provocative, and I don't mean it to be deliberately provocative, but it is just the way that it's seen, and that's what we're experiencing. You speak against it, however cleverly, however well, however much love you put into it, it's not acceptable. You are blaspheming against this particular religion.
Yeah. So we have. I mean, I was involved in one of the blasphemy cases earlier on in my career, and we've got rid of one blasphemy law. And many people say, "Fantastic! Let's get rid of, that protection that there was for the Christian religion and for the Bible." But then what we've just done is that, as G.K. Chesterton says, "He who doesn't believe in something will believe in anything." And so we have to believe in something. We have to have a cause. Young people need a cause that they need to kind of celebrate. We all do, to a certain extent, especially young people. And when they're being brought into the world, they think, what am I fighting for? What are the injustices of the world? And this movement is really just a product, to a certain extent, of a decaying Christian society, because at face value, it's all about, liking people and being nice to people and accepting people. So you think, well, surely this is the right thing to do. This is what many Christian clients are asked, either by the police or by their employers. They say, well, as a Christian, you should be nice to people, shouldn't you? And you think the thing is that at face value, it's a specious argument, but it's a clever argument. And a lot of people feel like, yeah, maybe I should actually be nice to people. But the thing is that the Christian message is ultimately offensive. And it's offensive to many people to be told the truth. Many clients over the years, I've had to say, look, I'm afraid to say you've got a real problem here in terms of addiction of some description. And it is offensive, but it's the truth. And the most loving thing to do in the world is to tell somebody the truth. And to say, love is love. You think, well, what is love? As Christians, we believe God is love. So what are your definitions?
Well, now listen, if you're watching live, do ask any questions you've got for Keith or Michael. But this point about blasphemy is interesting, isn't it? Because I read this article by Carl Trueman this week on First Things, where the article's called "Blasphemy, Old and New," I think, but it's talking about Monty Python, and of course Monty Python did this Life of Brian thing, which had a blasphemous scene in it about Jesus on the cross singing a song. I forgot what the song was now, and anyway, people complained that was blasphemous as Christians at the time, going back 30, 40 years. And then now they're complaining that Monty Python, the same films, are anti-trans because they've got jokes about trans in them, and they want to cancel the films for that reason. And so it's kind of blasphemy has moved from Christianity to trans LGBT stuff. It's quite a good illustration about it. It's always look on the bright side of life. Someone's reminding me now. It's quite a good illustration of how blasphemy has moved from Christianity to something else, because it will be something that people are afraid to offend or don't want to offend because that's their God, effectively.
Mm-hmm. That's right. I think the thing is that the cases.
I think it's.
Sorry, no, go ahead, Keith.
No, you carry on.
No, all I'm saying was that I think the thing is that what is seen at the Christian Legal Centre is really the tip of the iceberg. So from people that I know, friends that I know, just in within a 10-mile surrounding of where we live, there are people being approached. For example, doctors are now being approached regularly to say that I want a letter from my doctor to say that I'm no longer the gender that I was born with. Please, could you write a letter? And I'm speaking to somebody the other day and say, well, I'm not too sure what test I'm going to have to be able to perform with this person to work that out. And then other people, like, for example, I've got a friend who's an engineer who was told that he must put a flag on his desk. Huge engineering corporation. And he said he wouldn't do it. And then he, backwards and forwards with his employer, and eventually they relented. But every year, the likelihood is that there's going to be more and more people. It doesn't matter what field of work you're in, it's going to affect you in some way.
Mm-hmm. So we've got a question here from A.D. Reagan on Facebook saying, it does sound provocative, but you're right. Those who believe they have the powers that be are making it a religion. Praise God, we know he's all sovereign, but what can we all do to protect our children and young people? I'm going to go to you, Keith, for the first on this one.
I think that the key thing is a very simple thing, and that is taking it back. A couple of moments ago, Michael said something which I thought was really interesting and right. The vacuum of the collapse of the church, failing to be the church, failing to be obedient to Christ, has meant that it's been filled by this particular ideology. So people need a cause. The church needs to become the church again. Now, pastors need to be speaking and teaching the whole gospel, lovingly encouraging and training their congregations, their churches, their church family to get out there and know what they believe, why they believe it, to have the boldness and the compassion and the wisdom to go out. You don't want to go out with just one of those. You need that boldness, that compassion, that wisdom. So I think that's the first thing. But that's of course, there's a longer kind of lead time for the outcome of that because of an issue. Sorry, I think did we die there for a moment? Yeah. The issue, I think. Yeah. Was it me disappearing?
I think so.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, it is as I think I'm saying, that teaching, that's the long lead time job. But in the meantime, we really need to be praying. We need to be sharing everything we know about this. Again, not in a kind of sensational way, but just sharing with everybody we possibly can, Christian, non-Christian. When I had the kind of real issues that I was having with death threats and the lot, most people were really supportive. Most of them were not Christians. A lot of the Christians hid behind. In fact, I had no other pastor in the city I was in came to my aid or support. Lots around did. Lots of good people did. But they didn't. They were frightened. Now, the church needs to not be frightened. We need to be sharing and loving. There are a lot of people out there who don't have a faith at all and will take their lead on moral issues from Christians. And so we need to be leading.
Yeah, very good.
I mean, I'd agree with that as well. And I think the thing is that really pastors, ministers, and elders need to be speaking on this in church, because they're not. I mean, the other day, then I did a message at a church, in our own church, and I don't think I'm a particularly, I'm no Spurgeon by any stretch of the imagination, but people were coming up to me for weeks afterwards and just saying thank you for speaking about these issues, because nobody does. We talk in very kind of. We talk about pietism, the fact that, it's all about personal piety and your walk with God and what we can do in order to improve that. And all of that is, very much, part of preaching. But how is it that we are to engage with culture? Because culture wants to engage with us. There are people out there that really, really are searching for the truth in and amongst all of this. I know that church attendance is declining, but, just yesterday I had somebody who just rang me up and said, listen, I really want to come to house group, you gave me a Bible a number of years ago and it's just been playing on my mind. And so he asked to come to church. And so the thing is, the opportunities are still there. But unless we are taking risks for the gospel every day, then I don't think that God's going to particularly use us as individuals and as churches, because people want to know what is the answer to the world's problems. And the answer is the church. But where is the culture hurting at this point in time? And where it's hurting is the fact that we don't have an identity anymore. We're grappling around in the dark, looking for an identity, and we can say, look, you have an identity. You are, when you become a Christian, you become a child of God, and God loves you, and he wants to give you a new life in Christ. And it's a wonderful message. But unless we deal with the issue of the day, then we're going to be just shoved aside as something else irrelevant.
Yeah, I think that I just would only add one more thing to that, and that is that the real heart of this is repentance from the church, revival. And those two things go together. When we are genuinely seeking the Lord and asking him to revive us, revival in this land, well, that's great, but it's got to start with us. We need to be serious. And even of those of us who maybe feel we're kind of doing a bit more than others, we've got lots more to do. We can't rest on our laurels at any point. There is a fight going on, and we mustn't step back into the bunker. We've got to encourage others out into the battlefield, and all the way have our eyes fixed on our captain, because if we haven't, we're kind of doing our own thing. It's so important.
And Michael, it's been very interesting to see some backlash against Pride in the States. Bud Light has had a massive collapse in sales after asking a transgender social media influencer to promote their brand, and there was just a massive reaction against it. Sales down 28% and went down 6 weeks in a row there. And also Target in the state was offering Pride products and suffered a massive backlash and boycotts. And these companies are going to start thinking twice about promoting Pride. And I'm wondering if some of them are starting to think twice about it now. What's your reaction to that, Michael?
Yeah, well, what they say. They say, go woke, go broke. And, people don't disagree with, probably the majority of people, they say that's fine, that's what you want to do, etc. But when you start shoving it down people's throats, especially when it comes to children, then and certainly men as well, they're just not interested quite in the same way. And I was speaking to a campaigner recently, and she said to me that the people very often who are most in favor of trans rights are actually women. It's not men. And so I think the Bud Light really did. I mean, it was just the complete and utter own goal that you have this, this man who'd been, in musical shows and, everybody knew who he was. And then at the same time, he decided to dress up as a woman, and he went on and to advertise this, and endorsed by the president. He's gone to the White House to meet Joe Biden, etc. And they thought that they, let's do something here, because really, these corporations, they're only got on the bandwagon, and I think this is what some LGBT people would say, since it's become so popular. But it's almost become like a racketeering ring where you've got to endorse these particular sentiments, otherwise you feel as though you're going to lose sales. But in fact, it's the opposite. It's the opposite. And people are now beginning to say, no, this is too much, and we're just not interested. What attraction is there for the vast majority of heterosexual men to buy Bud Light? Well, there just isn't any. And so that's what you're going to start to see. So I think, and it's the right thing, because people, these corporations are going to only listen if people vote with their pounds and dollars. So that's what I'd encourage people to do. If there are companies out there pushing certain ideologies, then don't give them money, because we do. We're very careless with where we put our money.
Keith, any thoughts from you on that?
No, I think it's absolutely that. And it's so easy for us to be careless, isn't it? Because we think, well, that's where I always buy this from. It's where I buy that from. I'm going to go here or there. I mean, bizarrely, I had a load of emails from John Lewis. It was just kind of covered with rainbows all over the place. And I'm thinking, well, what's this got to do with kind of a general email from John Lewis? And it's one of those things you think, well, would I go there again? Well, I would try and avoid it. And it's the same with banks. There are so many of them. It's very difficult to find a bank that isn't supporting this, but it's possible. It's difficult to move our accounts, perhaps, but we should.
There's a lot of virtue signaling that goes on, isn't there, with these corporations trying to. They think it's going to win those customers by virtue signaling. We're on side and all this kind of stuff. And actually, sometimes, as Michael said, I think if they throw it, shove it down your throat and push it too aggressively, people get put off. And I hope that some corporations will have learned a bit of a lesson there and decide not to do that. But we'll see whether more of that comes going forwards or not. But Keith, what about Pride has been incredibly successful when you think about it, right? Michael mentioned back in the 1970s, and they were taking a risk then, and then they were pretty unpopular then, and it's gone from a very small ton of minority movement to something that is still a minority, but is supported by perhaps the majority. Well, it feels like certainly supported by the majority of the elites and the media companies and all that kind of thing. Have Christians got something to learn from that?
Well, I guess I thought about this, and in reality, I think there are two things I'd say. One is Spurgeon said something really wise at one point, where give people a circus 1 week, they'll want it every week, but they won't want the gospel. So yes, we should be relevant. Yes, we should be culturally relevant. We should get in there and roll our sleeves up and be in the world, but we should make sure we're not of the world. And I think all the things that this movement have benefited from are actually things which have been counter to the gospel. So if you've got an elite those in government, opposition, politicians, business, and people who are quite happy to kind of say, well, morally we want to be a bit more lax than we were, well then of course they're going to get involved. So I think that's a real negative. And the other thing is, you look in Scripture. Well, what happens when people in Scripture start to emulate the world or find themselves tempted in that direction? This week I'm going to be preaching on Abram going down to Egypt. Great example, isn't it? We should be trusting in the Lord, asking him to lead us, rather than looking elsewhere and going to trying to pick up hints elsewhere to get out of the hole. It's the hole that we've put ourselves in, but his grace and his mercy are those that are going to pull us out. So that's my kind of take on it. I might be kind of off the wall, who knows? But that's my feeling, really. I don't think we've got a lot to learn in the positive. I think we, as churches, we're quite good at doing, kind of putting on parties, doing stuff. That's fine. It's good. We should outreach, great, but got to make sure that we're doing it as we're led, rather than just trying to copy the world. You get the world.
Good point. Good point.
Yeah.
Michael, do you have further thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of, my heart is very often in evangelism, and why is it that so many people are attracted to a particular movement? And in some ways, there are certain things about it. The human heart is deceptive above all else, and there's an element where something which is bad, which is going on, then we're going to be attracted towards it. Back in 2,000 years ago, people enjoyed watching Christians being torn apart by lions because it was, there's something evil within us. But at the same time, there's also a feeling as though you're taking part in a counter-cultural movement and just standing up against that which is unjust. And so you think, well, what is it that is appealing to people? And I think we need to understand that very often when we engage in evangelism with people, then, sometimes people say, start with a certain line, which is going to bring the shutters up. But very often people involved, if you speak to them and you have conversations with them, you realize that there's a sense of hurt, there's a sense of rejection. And you can speak to that and you can say, look, I've had a similar situation to yourself. And there are many conversations I've had like this over the years, where people from that community, and I've spoken to them and ministered to them and just spoken to them about their background and tried to kind of get alongside them and talk about what it was that maybe drew them in a particular direction. And said, look, at the root, I think, of really why you've ended up in a particular situation is because really there's a hurt there. And I think that hurt is continuing. And I think as a Christian, if you don't mind me sharing with you, is that the way to deal with that hurt is through forgiveness, that we should offer to people who've hurt us, and also the hurt that, and also the forgiveness that God offers us ultimately. And if you are prepared, and if anybody is prepared to look at their life, and your life may be in a complete mess at the moment, and Jesus told the story about the wise man who built a house upon the rock, and I often share that with people, say, look, your house is in a mess, it's crumbled at the moment, you need to build on the solid foundation who is Christ. And if you rebuild your life on that foundation and make him your identity, rather than maybe your identity, your sexual identity, or your gender identity, or whatever it is, if that's your principal identity, then many of these problems will probably go away.
That's exactly, isn't it? Because it brings it back straight to the gospel. And when love is love and all of that, well, yes, we want to share that love, but of course it does mean that there's that challenge, and that's I think really important, and it's great when you can see Christians who have been taught well, who are being encouraged and are being supported, feeling able to have those conversations. It's so important. Yeah.
There's no rationality very often when you speak to people. You say, well, love is love. Well, what is love then?
Yeah.
It's a bit of a circular argument. And I did a court case recently where we asked about half a dozen people who worked at a primary school. They said, well, what is a woman then? Well, a woman is a woman. Somebody who identifies as a woman is a woman. But what makes that person a woman? Because they say that they're a woman. No, but that's a circular argument. What actually is? So the thing is that when you actually unpick very often the thinking that lies at the base of what these people have, then they realize that there's no rationality.
Yeah.
And so then
Lisa Rogers here on Facebook is pointing out that Love is Love was a paedophile logo. I mean, that is where it goes ultimately. You just vacuously define these kind of terms. But I'm always tempted to say love is not proud, which is obviously a quote from the Bible, 1 Corinthians 13, for the NIV version. Love is not proud. And so then how do you get to this? Yeah, it's all about love, because that's not the kind of love that the Bible talks about if it's proud like that. So I thought that was quite interesting take on it as well. Listen, just one more thing, Michael, for you. Pride flags. You see all these flags all over the place, including on government buildings and corporations and so on. Yeah, again, is it a political symbol? Is government buildings allowed to do that, and churches and so on?
Well, the thing is, first of all, I've got to caveat this because I'm not a planning lawyer. But my understanding is that if you go onto the government website, they say that there are only certain kinds of flags which you are allowed to fly in public. What are and the obvious ones I don't need to name. They say that the 6-colored pride flag is permitted. There's nothing on there about the transgender flag. Okay, and in those circumstances, my understanding is that you have to get planning permission. So it may well be, I walked past my local council, just not that long ago, and they had the Pride transgender flag. Have they got planning permission? I don't know is the honest answer. But, as Christians, do we just kind of just shrug our shoulders and say, well, it doesn't really matter? Or alternatively, do you just make the stand and say, well, look, you're breaking the law here? Where is your planning authority for doing this? And even if planning authority has been given or they've got permission, then, is this really an appropriate symbol? Is this something which brings the community together? They fly the British flag, they fly the Ukrainian flag. When do they ever fly? For example, there's even something called the Christian flag, and maybe you could even ask your council. Is that something that you're prepared to fly? For example, in the week where we remember persecuted Christians, and see what they say, because why is it that they're prepared to do that? And I think probably because many people who work in local government and people who work for the government, generally speaking, are quite left-leaning. And so they feel that this is the right thing to do. But the problem is that they feel that, but it excludes other people at the same time.
Very good. Well, Keith, closing comments from you. What would you want to say to Christians during Pride Month?
I think I would simply say just continue to be bold about your faith. Know who you believe, trust in him, ask him to give you the opportunities. Don't go looking for trouble, but ask him to give you the opportunities to have those conversations. It might just be a simple, very low-key thing, but do it. He'll give you the words, he'll give you the wisdom, and he'll give you the opportunities. And as Michael was sharing, so often you can have really good conversations starting off from something which we can see as a negative. But I do really think we need to be praying. We need to be seeking the Lord, and we need to be getting the message out as loudly but not proudly as we can. We've got to get the message out. We have the best good news ever. There is no other good news like it. And pride can sometimes see us looking as if we are people who are fighting against an ideology. Well, yes, we will, if that's what's in front of us. But our aim has got to be to share the gospel. Let's make sure that Jesus is front, right, left, center, everywhere, and leading us. So that's what I'd say.
Fantastic. Well, listen, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you, Keith. Great wisdom there, and Michael as well. And thank you for watching, if you're watching or listening. And great to have you. Hope you found that as enjoyable and interesting as I did. I look forward to seeing you again soon, and do follow us and like us on all our social media platforms. Thank you very much.